The healer was verbally instructed with cues to start and stop the distance intentionality in a random pattern. So they were told to start and stop in a random pattern in 12 different time periods. Now the scanner was a 1.5 Tesla. This is a very strong magnetic field, MR imaging system. I might mention that there's some people that told us that they lose their psychic abilities when they go in an MRI scanner because the magnetic field is too strong and they lose their psychic abilities. So I've heard that before. But anyway, with 1.5 MR imaging system, we can get very nice images. And for those of you involved in brain imaging, these will make sense to you if you're involved in brain imaging. These parameters are important to get good contrast in the brain related to the blood oxygen level dependence. So then we did fMRI analysis of the on-off patterns dictated to the healer. We used FSL from Oxford, the UK, to analyze the signal. We have single subject analysis and group analysis. So we do a group analysis after we do the single subject analysis. And then the results show that in the group analysis we had two very significant clusters. Now, let me tell you again what this means. This is a group analysis of the receivers who are inside the scanner, who are receiving signals from the healers. So all of the signal comes from the receivers, not the senders. And so the receivers are able to receive the signal from the healers, and we're able to measure the signal in their brain, and we get these two significant clusters with a probability of false positive of 8.5 times 10 to the minus ninth. So I think that's significant. That's 10 to the minus ninth is a significant significance. And we had another cluster of a little less significance. And so we can test the probability of using these techniques. Now, this is kind of blurry. I have better images than these, but this is one of the clusters in the back of the brain again, this is the group analysis cluster. And again, this is a part of the brain involved in visual processing and in imagery. So this is a part of the brain involved in image processing, even though they got no stimulus except from the healer. The healer was the only person giving the stimulus. And they got a signal here in the back of the brain. And then we also got a signal in the front of the brain, in the frontal regions. And so the anterior cingulate is involved in attention to stimulus. So that's one of the parts of the brain. And also the frontal regions are involved in a lot of higher order cognitive processing. So we get a lot of higher order level of cognitive processing, including language. So we get a lot of frontal areas involved in language. And so when we map those clusters, these are all the different regions that we get of activation from those group analysis of the clusters. Okay, so here's another paper that we published, again in the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine. And this was one of the first papers we published on just a couple of case reports. So the last details that I showed you involved 11 pairs of subjects, whereas this was only a couple of pairs. And again, we were showed signal in the back of the brain, and here's the time domain correlation of that signal. So we can plot the time course of the brain signal as a function of time as they're being as the person outside the scanner is sending the stimulus. In this case, the sender was getting checkerboard, flickerboard pattern So in this case, it was not a healer. It was just a sender that was watching a checkerboard flicker pattern that was randomly going on and off. And here again, we get the activation in the occipital visual parts of the brain. Okay, now some of these same people also, we did EEG analysis. Now the difference with EEG is that both the sender and the receiver were hooked up to the cap. They all got this cap with 16 channels of EEG recording. And in this case, we could record both the alpha wave pattern of the sender and the receiver. And we published this. Liana Stanis was the first author on this paper. And in this case, we were measuring EEG evidence of correlated signals. And this is the setup that we had at Bastyr University. So we had one subject positioned in one room, and he's watching a visual stimulus. We have the control center, and then we have another subject physically isolated from this other subject. And at one point, only one of the subjects is getting a stimulus, and the other subject is acting as a receiver. So I really like alpha waves because I've actually used alpha wave therapy in some of our patients with multiple sclerosis. So I like alpha waves, and I will show you the results. So Dean Radin suggested a technique for us to use to correlate the difference between the EEG signal between the senders and the receivers. So we used that technique, and we got a regression with a significance of 0.011. So this is a regression analysis between the sender signal and the receiver signal of their alpha. And so when you do a correlation, it's kind of scattered, but there is a significant correlation between the senders and the receivers. So the pink line is kind of the regression line, and all these individual dots is one dot from the sender-receiver pair. So this was a significant effect, correlating signals between the senders and the receivers who were isolated from one another. But now the group, again, the group at Bastyr University helped us to choose these people who claimed to have a connection with their partner. So these people claim to have a connection. And so some of them are more gifted than others, and they could repeat the effect over and over again, whereas some of them had more of a weak correlation. So just as with everything, you have the gifted and then the semi-gifted people. So these findings support previous research on distance healing, suggesting that human intentions may directly affect others in ways that are not entirely understood. But with functional imaging and with EEG, we can study these effects, and we can measure a signal in their brain. So I'll stop with that.
We have time for quite a few questions.
You mentioned at the beginning of your talk that when you had us raise our right hand, that would have left brain stimulation.
Right.
I had been to kind of a healing demonstration some years ago with Donna Eden, and she chose people in the audience to demonstrate a principle, and she said they were homolateral, which I think means your right brain is working with your right hand. And she performed some work on them energetically in very short order.